Hello my friends, Takuya here, and welcome back to another alternate history Hearts of Iron 4 video. Please remember to go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe, and if you want your suggestion to be the next video, then make sure to go ahead and put a comment with that suggestion down below, and we take the top 5 most liked comments and we put those suggestions in a poll in order to become the next video. From the last time that we did one of these here properly, by an overwhelming margin, a lot of you wanted what if Greece got back Constantinople through the Megali ideas. And I say that done properly because in the previous video that I did on this, I did that because I wanted to make that video because I had seen that suggestion many different times. So if you haven't seen that one video that I just did on what if Italy joined the Allies with the Stresa front if that never collapsed, go ahead and check that out. But out of over 22,000 people that voted, 44% of you wanted to see what would happen with Greece here. Well, my friends, let's go ahead and answer that question. Now, for the purpose of the scenario, we are going to be using the Great War Redux mod, the thing that is the World War I mod, where we'll be starting here in 1910, and we will be playing as Greece. Where is it? There you are. Now, the interesting thing about Greece is that Greece, technically speaking, kind of participated in World War I, at least towards the very end, but the big point in which Greece almost got back Constantinople, in which the Megali ideas were active, that was after World War I, when Turkey, which was formerly the Ottoman Empire, started to be carved up by varying different powers. And ultimately, it didn't actually succeed. This may bring up the question for many of you of what exactly is the Megali idea? Well, as it says here, after the Greek War of Independence ended in 1829, the great powers only granted the regions of the Peloponnese, the Cyclades, and Rumelia to the newly founded Hellenic Republic, with most ethnic Greeks still residing within the borders of the Ottoman Empire. After the 1843 revolution, the term appeared for the first time during the debates of Prime Minister Ioannis Kourtelis, leader of the French Party, with King Otto that preceded the promulgation of the 1844 Constitution. According to the Megali idea, the Greek nation must gather up strength to liberate Greek-inhabited territories under foreign rule, with its final goal being the liberation of the former Eastern Roman capital and cultural center of the Hellenes, Constantinople. When George I ascended the throne in 1863, the title offered to him by the Greek National Assembly was not King of Greece, the title of his deposed predecessor, King Otto, but rather King of the Hellenes. Forward that, the kingdom saw a rapid extension over the decades with the annexation of the Ionian Islands under the Treaty of London in 1864 and the annexation of Thessaly and Arta under the Convention of Constantinople in 1881. The hopes are still high, and the Megali idea is slowly becoming concrete reality rather than an idealized concept. Yes, so over the years, since the founding of the, Kingdom of Greece, which is actually under the rule of a German king, it is a German family that rules it, the goal for Greece was to take back all of this territory. And this is something that may have happened, but historically it ultimately did not. Why though? Well, for one reason, in the aftermath of World War I, Greece didn't really participate enough in the war in order to be able to get a lot of concessions from the Ottomans, or I should say this here, the Allies did not help them to get nearly as much. As for why Greece didn't really appear in the war until later on, that is, as I said, because of the German royal family. Something that, they were very pro-Central Power, while the remainder of Greece was very pro-Allies. Like, I kid you not, one of the big problems that Greece had in this time is that for years there was basically a split government. There was a government that was loyal to the prime minister, and there was a government that was loyal to the king. And that's basically what you had, which caused Greece to be paralyzed, unable to do anything. So then for the purpose of the scenario in which we're going to say that Greece got Constantinople, in which the Megali ideas succeed. But my friends, before we get back into today's episode, I would just like to thank today's sponsor, Mysterium VPN. Guys, I will honestly never not do a VPN ad on this channel because considering everything that we talk about, you all know, whether it's Bangladesh, Egypt, anything we talk about with China, VPN services are honestly not just a good thing, they're arguably becoming more and more necessary as time goes on. And depending upon where you are, Mysterium VPN is probably going to be one of your best choices, as it is the largest VPN network in the entire world. Every time it is that you get onto the internet, there are people that can track you, from the government or otherwise. This is a real thing that happens. And so whether you are trying to just obscure where it is that you are, or whether or not you're trying to get access to things for like Netflix in other countries or anything like that, Mysterium VPN has more IP addresses and locations than any other service that is out there. And I will honestly never stop taking VPN ads because, as I said, it's one of the best services that you could possibly use, and I want people to get the deals to be safe when they can. So my friends, by all means, please protect yourself. Go to mistvpn.net/Takuyi and use code STAKUYI in order to get 83% off a 2-year plan. Be safe on the internet, people. This is what we're going to have to change. First off, from the very beginning, there's nothing that we're really going to change industry-wise. We're going to assume that Greece has the same industry now, or at least at this time, as it would in our own historical timeline. And from that, yes, Greece is still suffering with terrible amounts of debt. It is something that Greece all the way through its history, had constant dealings with, debt issues. It was just, it was one of the constants of Greece. The big event that is going to shape the Balkan region then is going to be the First Balkan War, the alliance between Greece, Bulgaria, and Serbia that take out large chunks of the Ottoman Empire here, and from that, you would then get the Second Balkan War, which leads into the third. It's complicated. But okay, how does that factor, you may wonder? Well, as we're going to explain, historically what happened is that after the First Balkan War, in which Greece, Serbia, and Bulgaria easily trounced the Ottoman Empire and took back all of this territory, the Bulgarians were not satisfied with the amount of territory that they got, and as a result, they launched the Second Balkan War in order to be able to seize more from their former allies, which created a lot of devastation. The result of this would just be terrible suffering all around, and by the time everything came to an end, Serbia and Greece would just really not have much money or ability. Greece could not launch further attacks against the Ottoman Empire, and when it came time to the Ottoman Empire engaging in mass, terrible treatment of Greek populations in the aftermath of the war, of which there was many, you might be able to term genocide or something else like that, yeah? This led to a call in Greece to wage war upon the Ottomans, but the Serbians refused to join in because they were broken after the war. So in order to get our scenario to happen, we will follow the historical path, but there's a couple things that we will end up changing, with the first thing being the reorganization of the armed forces. The reorganization of our armed forces is necessary if we wish to secure our interest in the Balkans. Though the Theokotis government was able to make significant progress in this area, the shadow of 1897 still looms over our nation. Once again, the Balkans have begun to stir, and Hellas must not be caught unprepared. Yes, Greece and everything else here currently are not in good positions army-wise. That is all going to be fixed in preparations for the Balkan conflict. All of this is going to be done in preparation. After continuing the army reforms, we're then presented with an option of either inviting the French attachés or the German attachés. This is the debate that would exist within Greece at this time, to align themselves more with Germany or with the Allies. The historical timeline is to invite French attachés, and that's exactly what it is that we're going to do. We will continue with that line, and we are going to say that the Greek population, or at least the Greek government that is not under the control of the direct king, this means that they are going to have more sway and authority within society to be able to actually make these changes and align themselves more with the Entente. Of course, dealing with the Entente is still going to have a bit of a split in the government, as there will be issues with things like the French attaché. It appears that Crown Prince Constantine, which is the current Inspector General of the French military attaché, has complained about the maneuvers at Tanagra, engaging in a very harsh criticism of the army state, essentially declaring it in a worse state than it was before 1909. Although he did not directly criticize the French mission, the implication was obvious, so that Endo is threatening that he and his men will lead the country. Yeah. But the big thing that is relevant here for our mission is the 1910 elections. Elections were declared recently by Prime Minister Stefanos Dragomis in order to ensure political normality from the change of regime a few months ago. The military coup echoed the outcry for reform throughout Greece, and Dragomis is being pressured heavily to resign in favor of Gonoris or Venizelos. Although the popularity of Venizelos is astronomically high, it is up to the king's choice to appoint whoever it is that he pleases. Yes, and the person, just as it was in our own historical timeline, who gets appointed, will be Venizelos. He is the guy who is the father of modern Greece, and actually, if you go and play the base game here for regular Hearts of Iron 4 and play as Greece, you can actually bring him back temporarily before he dies in 1936 going into 1937, because he's old by then. And so there we have it, Dragomis resigns. Today, Stefanos Dragomis, under heavy pressure from the now disbanded Military League and low public opinion, have decided to step down, leaving room for two candidates. The first candidate is Eleftheros, or which I'm probably butchering all the pronunciations here, Venizelos, a young Cretan statesman who is well known for his actions in the Therasso Revolt and has actively participated in the Goti movement. The second candidate is Dimitrios Goneris, the leader of the Japanese group, which strongly opposed the old parties, and is known for his radical views against elitism. While both will carry reforms needed, it is very important which one shall be appointed, and we are going to go with Venizelos. Because you can see here, the Venizelos will allow you to negotiate with the Entente, whereas Goneris will force you to go down to commit neutrality, which is, we're not going to commit to neutrality, we need to actually participate more in the war. So Venizelos is the one who is going to take charge here. From that, the next step that we're going to say here is that the immediate action of Venizelos and the new government that takes power is that they are going to centralize control under themselves, that they are going to be able to instill a greater sense of, national pride, other things, essentially have more political power and sway in the government than they perhaps did in our own timeline. To that end, they are going to promote national unity. With Hellas undergoing a political upheaval, national unity must be encouraged in order to smooth the transition into planned new elections. Regardless of political ideology, the nation must stand united against the trials and tribulations ahead. After that, Parliament will be temporarily dissolved, and then from that, the new government is going to take greater hold of power. In fact, to this end, what it is that we have done in order to give ourselves additional time, we did not give ourselves any more factories or anything else, but I did do the focus.autocomplete that allowed me to complete more of the army reforms. The argument that we are going to make here from the beginning is that reforms started a little bit earlier. Call it 6 months, call it 7, 8 months, whatever it is that you want. Some reforms happened earlier, which means that Greece, by the time that the Balkan War broke out, was actually a little bit better prepared than it was in our own timeline. Not much, but this is a big important move that needs to be made. After this then, the old parties will be boycotted, and the government will launch a mass appeal to the people. An appeal in which modest reform is promised. Reforms will be made, but they will not radically change the country. They will preserve some of the old order, but they will bring back stability and also happiness and change for the people. As this is happening, the opposition would be alienated, and they would convene a revisionary assembly. And with that, my friends, then, new elections would be declared. Now, the actual legislative election in our own timeline wouldn't take place until, 1912? But what it is that we would see is the 1911 Constitution would be created, and this is something that would help to stabilize the government. If recent events have proved anything, it is that our Constitution of 1864 has failed in upholding the principles of our democracy. The dedicated assembly has already submitted their proposals to the government, outlining the many areas that need to be amended for reform or the old Constitution. Yes. While all this is happening, simultaneously, the military is still being reformed. Which, just as in our own timeline, a British naval mission is the thing that would be invited. Arguably the greatest seafaring nation, the United Kingdom's expertise in naval warfare cannot be overstated. By inviting a British naval mission, we will reaffirm our ties to a traditional ally of Hellas and receive valuable feedback so as to improve our navy as a whole. And of course, during these reforms, compromises would still need to be made. It's not like that you can completely get rid of the royal family entirely, so Prince Constantine would be promoted. In order to avoid any tensions with the Greek royal family, we will promote Diadochus Constantinos, the son of King George I, as Constantinos seems to be capable militarily and might lead us to great victories in the future. With that, Greece would prepare itself for a Balkan conflict. As the ancients once said, if you want peace, prepare for war. Hellas is poised to claim its birthright. Under no circumstance shall we squander such a grand opportunity. The final preparations for the Balkan War are already underway. We will march to victory. Preparations would begin around this time, while simultaneously reforms would be taking place across the countryside. Reforms such as strengthening the party, reforming the status of property, labor legislation, expanding primary education, all of these things would be done during this time, which we will see pop over here in our decisions tab once that actually occurs. Reforming bureaucracy, civil service, judicial system, magistrate councils, all of this would be taken care of, as the fabric of society itself is changed and shaped for the modern future. Bulgarian proposal. Bulgaria has approached our embassy in order to strengthen our relations. Although we are opposed on the fate of the Macedonian populations, the idea of liberating the Balkans together from the yoke of the Ottomans remains omnipresent. Omnipresent. Dear God. Can we trust the Bulgarians? Well, historically, we would say yes, we do trust them, even if we are somewhat opposed. The Balkan League is still going to form. And just as in our own timeline, Italy would invade Libya, which would cause havoc for the Ottomans, displaying their further weakness, as the Ottomans were really the sick men of Europe by this time. Land reform, agricultural education, encouraging farming cooperatives, creating a Ministry of Agriculture, all of this would be done during this time in rapid order. We're going to say that the Greeks managed to adopt and modernize and develop themselves at a somewhat faster rate than they did in our own time. Maybe not much, but some we will say. Along with that, in preparation for a coming conflict, even if it would push them somewhat further into debt, we will say that the Greeks did purchase a degree of equipment, support equipment, artillery pieces, these kinds of things, to be able to use in the battlefield. The entire time that all this is going on, Venizelos is building his own support among the countryside. The Hellenic farmer has a friend of Venizelos. The Prime Minister seeks to expand the Liberal Party support in the countryside by providing extra benefits to landless farmers, even more than previously outlined by the Constitution. This kind of support that is going to be built during this time will be massive, and a huge effort that would be necessary in order to be able to change things, well, as we're going to need to for this timeline. Because what Greece is working towards is the embracing of the Megali idea. The idea of a greater Hellenic state is not just a novel concept, but an old one inspired by our history and culture, being bolstered by the Hellenic population living under foreign yoke that awaits our liberation. The Megali idea will be the centerpiece of Venizelos' national vision for Hellas. With this, my friends, we are going to assume that by early or mid-1912 that the Greeks are fully prepared for war. They have modernized themselves, they have adopted new technologies, army units, etc., while at the same time managing to drastically fix their political situation and can begin to then focus on economic matters such as addressing the state of the currency. Now, it's at this point that we're presented with two options, either supporting the monopolies, which is the historical timeline, or moving towards etatism. As it even says in the description of these, The difference between the two is basically short-term benefit, long-term pain versus short-term pain, long-term benefit. If you support the monopolies, you can get your economy back on track faster, but in the end, it's going to hurt us in the long term. Meanwhile, by moving towards etatism and having the state intervene and affect things more, this is going to help things in the long term, but it's going to be a rather painful process. What we'll assume in this timeline is that rather than going down the historical supporting of monopolies, that Greece, from its greater political will, I guess you could say, that it's accumulated by Venizelos having a stronger position in here, that the government is going to have more power to be able to successfully be able to modernize itself. This is the same kind of concept that would actually make Turkey a decent power in the immediate aftermath of World War I. Greece is going to adopt this around the same time. And with less concern from the monopolies, this perhaps means that Greece will not have nearly as big of a debt problem. Cretan ministers stormed parliament. Today, Cretan representatives attended to participate in the opening session of the Greek parliament, but were violently repelled by a strong army and armed force. A Cretan member of parliament, Michael Descarelis from Rhythmo, managed to enter the conference room and participate in the oath. He was noticed when he cheered for the union, even applauded by some MPs, and was removed by order of the prime minister. There's some issue with the Cretans here at this time. But that is not the only political event that happened during this time. The Icarian Greek revolt was going to take place. Ottoman rule in the Balkans has been shaken once again. A Greek uprising broke out in the Aegean island of Icaria, evicting the Turkish garrison. While the Greek government has yet to take an official position, this is yet another spark thrown into the already volatile Balkan powder keg. And yes, this was going to happen. The issue with Icaria and others in this case is that the Ottomans would crack down harshly upon the Greeks, which in turn was going to cause much of Greece to want to intervene in the war. We can say from this argument that the Ottomans cracked down even harsher than they did in our own timeline, which was already pretty bad. Or we can say, like what it is that we were building up, that the government was going to have more authority this time around once things actually break out. And so here we have it, my friends, the first event, calm before the storm. The preparations for the inevitable war are complete. Now is the time to slowly start the plans to fully liberate the peninsula from 5 centuries of Turkish rule. In a few days, the attack will be launched. Let us push them back to Asia. We have the First Balkan War. The Balkan War, the powder keg has exploded. What we are going to say from this is that things are going to go significantly better for the Balkan faction, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece, than it did in our own timeline. As it stands, the First Balkan War itself lasted from October of 1912 going all the way until what of 1913? May of 1913, that is the time frame. It was a quite short war, and then on top of that, it was one that saw a decent number of casualties. With between the allied forces of Serbia, Bulgaria, and the Kingdom of Greece around 156,000 casualties, while the Ottomans would see around 340,000. So pretty hefty, all things considered. So what we will assume in this new timeline is that the war will arguably be a little bit shorter, maybe by a month or two, and then on top of that, the Balkans will suffer less casualties. Maybe the Bulgarians will suffer more just as they did in our own timeline, which historically is something that happened. Bulgaria suffered like double the casualties of the other two, but that is something that we're going to need to try to manage here. We will say from the success of Greek reforms and their army as well as their administration, that it in turn is going to allow them to take over significantly more territory than they did in our own time, with Greek cavalry rapidly advancing through the countryside and freeing the population. From this, Icaria, which had rebelled against the Ottomans, would join with us with Greece, and a race for Thessaloniki would begin, and this is going to be one of the key things that would lead to a war with the Bulgarians, is the Bulgarians wanted Thessaloniki, but so did the Greeks. War has broken out once again in the Balkans, and after 15 years of our humiliating defeat at the Greco-Turkish War of 1897, we shall reclaim what has always belonged to Hellas. Even though we are allied with the Bulgarians, for now, we strictly agreed in our ascension to the Balkan League that the territory that is captured by both parties in the war will be ceded in the peace conference. Therefore, we and the Bulgarians are at a race for Thessaloniki, Solun as they call it, the second largest port of the Ottoman Empire and of great strategic importance. Even though the Bulgarians are the so-called Prussia of the Balkans, we will prove them wrong as we did in the Macedonian struggle, and they will have already and as they have greatly underestimated our army. Yes, indeed, this is the point here. Very quickly, the entirety of the Balkans, just as in our own timeline, would essentially be freed. The Turkish forces would all but collapse in the wake of this. And just as in our own timeline, Thessaloniki would be taken. Although there was some small confusion in the high command whether to advance in Bitola or Thessaloniki, after scoring a decisive victory in Yendigi, we advanced swiftly in Thessaloniki with no resistance. The commander of the city's defenses, Hasan Tashin Pasha, has unconditionally surrendered the city to us. After 5 centuries of Ottoman rule, the Simperpatufusa of Byzantium is once again in Greek hands. Despite the Bulgarians having issued their complaints and demanding that they be allowed to march in the city, we will still organize our festivities. Our king, George I, will soon visit the city. What could go wrong? Well, a lot, actually. Meanwhile, another major event takes place for Greece, where the king gets assassinated. While on an afternoon walk near the White Tower in Thessaloniki on March of 1913, the good King George I was shot at close range in the back by Alexandros Shinas, who held ties to a socialist organization. Since he was visiting Thessaloniki without any meaningful protection force, no one could save him from the disaster. His son, Constantine I, is now king of Greece. He was meant to be crowned anyway, as the former king was planning to abdicate in favor of his son, but Constantine immediately after celebrating his Golden Jubilee. But that was no longer going to happen. There it is then, my friends, just as in our own timeline, by May, the Ottomans would ask for an armistice. That war would end, peace would reign, at least for the short time. What we're going to say from this event is that the Greeks and the Serbians did not perhaps suffer nearly as much. Maybe the Bulgarians suffered a little bit more, and the Ottomans definitely suffered more. The casualties would have been horrendous. With that, we have the Greco-Serbian Treaty of 1913. The looming Bulgarian threat to the stability of the Balkans needs to be countered by a strong Greco-Serbian alliance that will be able to counter the Prussia of the Balkans with military force. The protocol also included a 50-year commercial agreement, which allowed the use of Thessaloniki by Serbian companies. The final treaty of peace, friendship, and mutual protection was signed in Thessaloniki on the 1st of June 1913 by the Greek ambassador to Belgrade, Ioannis Andrianopoulos, and the Serbian ambassador to Athens, Mijeta Boskovic. Yes, my friends, in the aftermath of the war, as Bulgaria turns upon Greece and Serbia, what we will say is that the greater powers would see the rise of things in the Balkans and would seek to invest in order to gain their own kind of influence, especially with the waning power of the Ottoman Empire. Varying politicians would be invited for investment talks, which, we will say, largely succeeded. Whether it was Germany, Britain, Austria, or France, every single power wanted to be able to invest in Greece in order to be able to gain greater influence. In the varying powers deciding to invest in Greece, this would drastically increase Greek capabilities for military purpose, for economic purposes, for pretty much everything. Investments that would help with railways, which would help with factories, which would help with everything. And so it is, my friends, heading into September of 1913, that we have the Second Balkan War. Bulgaria turns upon the Greeks, and the unfortunate reality of this for the Bulgarians is that this war was going to go horribly for them. The war itself would only last around 5 or 6 weeks in our own timeline, and with roughly equal casualties on both sides, we will instead say that this time, the Kingdom of Bulgaria failed horribly, even more so than they did in our own timeline. Maybe instead of 5 or 6 weeks, it only lasts 3, and that Greece is able to rapidly invade through the south. Romania itself would also join the Balkan War, allowing another front to open up, and this would in turn cause a rapid collapse. And with that, the war would be over, just like that. With that, we would have the Treaty of Sofia, and peace would exist at last. Situation in northern Epirus. Following the battles waged against the Ottomans, an Albanian autonomous movement took power in the north of Epirus, Vlor. It is likely that Austria and Italy will go and try to crush the Serbian access to the sea via Albania, and that could include northern Epirus as well, though it shouldn't be a problem for now. Yes, this would prove to be an issue here. Unfortunately, the success that Greece would have at this time would raise the ire from Austria-Hungary, which would order us to withdraw from northern Epirus, which, yes, we will have to do. During this time in early 1914, then, it would be extremely important to appoint general governors to increase in compliance. Eventually, this territory will be considered a core territory of Greece. And we will say that these were rapidly successful. And with this greater territory, greater resources, greater everything that Greece now has, this would allow them at this time to demand new terms from the IFC. The IFC must be made to understand that it is everyone's best interest that Hellas pays its debt in full. As such, we will force through more favorable terms on the threat of reneging unless a new agreement can be reached. And this, my friends, then, is the events that I was talking about, the massacre of Phocaea. A few days ago, Turkish regular bands looted the villages south of Menemen, causing the Greek population to flee. Greek refugees of the surrounding regions poured into nearby Phocaea on June 11th. On June 12th, the irregular bands launched their attack against Phocaea itself. The attack began during the night from 3 different sides and was well organized from the beginning. The armed groups broke into several dwellings and shot their inhabitants, irrespective of age and sex. While apart from the killings, several things also occurred. The surviving civilian population ran to the harbor and tried to escape by boat. Due to the general disorder, some people were drowned while trying to swim in order to save themselves. The Ottoman authorities tried to cover up the incident. However, after 2 days, a French steam tugboat arrived at Smyrna and spread the news about the massacre. The crew had observed a large number of people on the promontory and sent 700 survivors to nearby Greek island of Lesbos. The Greek authorities there rescued the remaining 6,000 inhabitants by sending boats to bring them home to the island. Yes, my friends, this is what would happen in the aftermath of the Balkan Wars. In reprisals against the local minority populations of areas, or in fact could even be the majority populations in some cases, Ottoman authorities and garrisons and other forces would rapidly descend upon Greek populations, massacring them across the coast. This would cause Greece to want to declare war upon the Ottoman Empire, but Serbia did not back them at this time. Serbia was dealing with the aftermath of the First and Second Balkan War and was not in a manpower or debt position to be able to do so. The country was not in a proper state for a war. In this new timeline, we will say that that same thing is true, but perhaps this does not strain the relations between both Serbia and Greece. That in the aftermath of this, historically, when Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia, Greece did not come to Serbia's defense. Because here we have now the July crisis. Franz Ferdinand is assassinated. Mobilization across Europe would take place. And meanwhile, Greece absorbs the IFC. No longer will it be burdened by debt. Upcoming Great War. The Hellenic government is under circumstance that the neighboring countries are heavily related to any faction of war participants. Even the state that there are some opinions to join the conflict that could happen possibly in a few weeks. But King Constantinople I is not willing to join any war and wants to keep neutral with slightly German-sided. Yes, the royal family of Greece, as I said earlier, wants to side or at least stay neutral because of its support of the Central Powers. Meanwhile, the rest of Greece wishes to ally with the Entente. This is the point that we will have to rapidly descend through, and the unfortunate reality of this mod with World War I, the Great Redux mod, is that it is extremely restrictive when it comes to our, ability to do things. The Great War will take place, Serbia will get attacked, and we, ourselves, will have to actually go and rapidly move through the conflict in the tree. We're going to need to use auto.focus complete a lot. Because unfortunately, as it stands, Greece is not allowed to simply join the Entente. We are not able to do so. But we are able to negotiate with them. Hellas' interests ultimately align with those of the Entente. Venizelos is confident in the British Lion's ability to break the German Eagle. Thrace and Anatolia await our liberation. If France and Britain agree to our territorial demands, we should join the Great War on their side. We will say from this that Greece becomes more involved in the conflict of World War I. Perhaps from this, greater efforts, greater logistics, greater everything that could be done, Gallipoli does not need to be such a shit show as it was in our own timeline. To that end, we desire Anatolian territorial concessions. The coastal city of Smyrna was one of the largest ports in the Mediterranean and is home to almost 200,000 Greeks. While it would be difficult to convince the Entente to acknowledge our claim to Prusa and Etela, the city of Smyrna and the general area around it should be a relatively easy sell to the French and British. After that, we will claim eastern Thrace, of course, and though not immediately join the conflict, we'll be able to assist the Entente navies. The problem is then that we're not able to actually do anything until the national schism occurs, and this is one of the difficulties with this mod, is that it's going to force us to have to wait, which is precisely what we're going to need to do, at least for a limited time. The aid given to the powers of the agreement caused the dissatisfaction of King Constantine I, being a Germanophile and thus wanting Greek neutrality in the Great War. As a result, Prime Minister Venizelos was forced to step down, with the king now assuming full power. This, in turn, was going to create a massive schism, something that was going to paralyze Greece. But what we will say in here is just as what naturally happened, new elections will be forced, a new government will be made, and from this, the Entente, or rather, the liberals under Venizelos will reign supreme. The king does not approve of Venizelos' pro-Entente foreign policy. It is evident that in order for Hellas to join the Entente, Venizelos must call upon the people's support to overrule Constantine's increasingly authoritarian actions. New elections will be forced through to secure the Liberal Party's position and to reaffirm the approval of the populace. Because just as in our own timeline, the pro-Entente Venizelos would win the election. Despite being dismissed, it's really hilarious. This in turn would allow Venizelos to form a new government, something that was firmly pro-Entente. Yes, by the beginning of 1915, the national schism would really only grow worse. Since the ousting of the Prime Minister Venizelos, many rallies have taken place in all of new northern Greek territories. The local populations there mainly support Eleftherios Venizelos and his position to join the Entente, while the inhabitants of Old Greece wish to remain neutral under an anti-war sentiment and have gathered around Constantine. This tension has led to an increasing important split, not only of Greek politics, but the population as well. Yes, the schism is bad, but what we will say is that perhaps there was less of a split in this time because of how much support Venizelos was able to gain in previous years. Just as in our own timeline, Serbia would manage to hold out for quite a while against Austria-Hungary, over a year in fact. The big thing that would end up changing things is come October of 1915, which is when the Bulgarians would join the conflict on the side of the Central Powers. They were going to get their revenge one way or another. Yes, the Tsardom of Bulgaria would invade Serbia. Serbia, our ally, faces invasion by the Bulgarians. Our current situation with the king proves that we are sadly unable to come to their aid as we would have wanted. We will have to find a different way to aid them. Historically, what this means is that the Greeks would invite an allied force in Thessaloniki to serve as an expeditionary force to fight against the Bulgarians. This is one of the key fronts that would take place in World War I that not many people actually talk about. It's fascinating, really. Sadly, the fall of Serbia would be rather quick due to the intervention of Bulgaria in this conflict. And historically, the Allied Expeditionary Force did not arrive in time to actually provide any meaningful defense. That, my friends, would be the Macedonian front. French troops had begun to land in Thessaloniki, erecting provisional fortifications on the border to repel any Bulgarian attack. In coordination with our allies, a new Macedonian front against the Central Powers will be established, affirming our support for Serbia and solidifying our position within the Entente. What we will say from this time, and yes, we have to skip forward a lot, which is normally not something that I like to do, but by virtue of this mod, we have to rapidly take a lot of these focuses and enact them in order to make the decisions to be able to join in on the war earlier. Because that is really the crux of this argument, is that the Greeks are able to join in on the war earlier, are in a stronger position, and from this, maybe Serbia itself is actually in a stronger position. Maybe it itself doesn't fully collapse, that Belgrade and a few key areas manage to hold out. And so despite the fact that there have been recent elections, King Constantine I still does not accept Prime Minister Venizelos' pro-Entente position. The invitation to the allies by Venizelos enraged the king, and the dispute between the Greek Prime Minister and the king reached its height shortly after the king invoked the Greek constitutional right that gave the monarch the right to dismiss a government. In September of 1915, Constantine forced Venizelos to resign for a second time, after an anti-German speech of the latter in the parliament, and dissolved the liberal-dominated parliament, calling for new elections. In his speech, Venizelos warned that a German victory would be a disaster for Greece. Venizelos warned that in the event of a German victory, then the Ottomans would wage a genocide against the Greeks of Anatolia, while allowing the Bulgarians to annex Serbian Macedonia, would inevitably be followed by demands for Greek Macedonia. What we will say then is that after several months, maybe even a full year of battles back and forth politically between the two entities, eventually Venizelos would be able to take power again. Now in this mod, things can't actually happen until, what it is, the French decide to expand the Macedonian front, which that's not going to happen, mind you. That literally can't happen in this because it's like a timed event that doesn't happen until later. So we are going to have to do some sneaky things. We gotta turn on focus.node checks, then we just gotta go ahead and skip through this. We will organize the Committee of National Defense, with the danger of the Allies giving Thessaloniki Macedonia to the Kingdom of Serbia. A committee consisting of Macedonian Greek officers and citizens shall be created. The leadership shall be given to Eleftherios Venizelos, who, however, in order to take it over, set as a condition in the participating of military units in the movement, which he wants through Greece and not only in Macedonia. Yes. It is here then that we begin to organize Venizelos rallies in Thessalonica. The surrender of Fort Rupel has been a disastrous act of treachery by the royalist government, and its effects can be heard echoing throughout Thessaloniki, with citizens and officers alike fearing that they will be next. We shall gather the people, the officers, and the Entente forces in a rally in which we will declare a revolutionary government with the triumvirate of Venizelos, Konterotis, and Douglas. Yes, indeed. Because Serbia would capitulate, and there really would be nothing that we would be able to do about that. Because, my friends, with our absolute dominance politically, at this point, we will be able to form the Thessaloniki state, completely bypassing any need for a civil war. With this, Greece, or at least part of Greece, is going to enter the war. Yes, my friends, no longer by July of 1917, instead in spring of 1916, the Greeks will join the fray, a full year earlier and a massive turn in the south. Of course, Thessaloniki will wish to expand the front. To prevent royalist forces from organizing and possibly attacking our positions, we need to expand our controlled territory with the support of the Entente. This is rather important, and we have to enter into local armed clashes. Hopefully, this does not blow up into an all-out civil war. With such a completely unexpected move, this would allow the Allied Entente forces, as well as the Greek forces, to be able to rapidly move into parts of Bulgaria before the line itself can consolidate. Of course, things still would stabilize, and from that, we are going to have to, well, control things for a bit. With Entente forces now able to flood through a much larger front down to the south, this will put Bulgaria in a significantly weaker position. Even as what the hell is going on over here? France, how did you let the Germans break through this? What even happened here? Okay. Yes, and of course, we will expand the front. Fall of Paris. What the frick? No, this is hold on. Oh my god. Guys, I'm trying to tell a story here. This is not supposed to be happening. This is not, because I opened up the front. Because I opened up the front, probably, this means that Entente forces were able to flood into here, which, what the fuck? No, we're gonna need to go back and fix this. Okay, I kind of fixed it, but not really. Oh my god, France, how are you so bad at defending your territory? This makes no sense in 1916. Dear God. Okay, you know what? We're just going to consolidate the front and try to fix all this here. What we'll say is that Greece managed to consolidate the Macedonian front, that they managed to blockade royalist ports, and that once things finish here, they're able to force the king to abdicate in rapid order. With that, we are presented with the option of proclaiming the Second Hellenic Republic or of inviting Alexandros, the second son of former King Constantine I. Not only is he pro-Entente, but is also a popular choice of Britain. The cooperation of Venizelos and Alexandros is already ensured, and he can essentially become a puppet of the Venizelists. Yes, this is exactly what would happen. With that, the Greeks are able to re-establish the Lazarus Parliament and declare martial law while the war takes place. And that is all that I could do. That is all that I am going to do, because now we have to wait until the war is actually over. But with that, my friends, Greece is now fully within the war. And this whole thing is stupid, because in doing so, it forces me to switch all of my divisions, oh my god. All the designing, all the everything that I did prior to this mod, that's so stupid for this mod. It literally destroyed all of my divisions that I built. Oh, I hate that. 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 Why would you do this to me? So yes, my friends, with the Greeks fully entering the fray, this actually has massive repercussions. Because not only does it mean that more Entente forces are able to open up an additional front that is less stagnant, but simultaneously it puts significantly more pressure upon Bulgaria, Austria-Hungary, and more, which means there's actually going to be less pushes into Russia itself. With the fact that the Greeks are involved in the conflict now, this means that they're able to make greater gains from that and a more consolidated push into Bulgaria in the south. Historically, in our own timeline, Bulgaria was able to last all the way through September of 1918 before being, well, knocked out of the war. In this timeline, perhaps it would be faster. Oh my god, France, are you... How? I'm doing so much better over here, and yet still, France, you are falling to the Germans. With the fact that Serbia was able to resist significantly harder, with the fact that Austria-Hungary has to deal with so much further in the south, and on top of that, the Russians, this means that there's a chance that the Italians would actually be able to make greater gains in the south, due to the fact that there is significantly less pressure or defense that they have to face, while somehow the French are performing worse, maybe because more of their line is being pulled off. White Peace France. I have to go back and White Peace France. I'm trying to tell a story here. Anyway, perhaps by, summer of 1917 then, Bulgaria fully collapses, with drastically increased Entente support in the south, and also with increased Greek presence. This means that there really is nothing that can be done. With the collapse of the Bulgarian government, this means that southern Austria-Hungary is very quickly falling under siege. The varying different separatist movements that already existed within the region will in turn likely rise up at this time as Entente forces enter from the south, inevitably leading to collapse of Austria-Hungary itself. Now, all of this is not to say that the war is necessarily going to be over even faster. There is a chance that it's going to be over sooner, as you probably have an earlier collapse of Austria-Hungary as the south falls, but at the same time, it's not exactly going to mean all that much. In fact, in this timeline here, the Ottoman Empire has already peaced out with the Allies, but that in and of itself is odd. The Ottomans managed to last for quite a long time, so we could make the argument from that as Greece moves further north, this puts the Ottomans in a further desperate position, one that they were not in our own timeline until really going into 1918, even though things were rather deadly for them. But as influenza grips the armies of Europe, eventually, Vienna would probably fall. With that, Austria-Hungary would collapse. By late 1917 then, beginning into 1918, the involvement of the United States would seal the deal for the Central Powers. The Central Powers are not able to effectively fight further. They're asking for an armistice from the Entente, which means that the war is finally over and the Central Powers have lost. The Great Powers will soon cease the endless gunfire and bloodshed. A new era has arrived and the political geography changes drastically, and the old order is completely shattered. The Great War, which resulted in the death of millions of innocent people, would now finally end, and the dead are able to rest in peace. The Entente is victorious, and with that, we have peace. The result of which, in 1918, is going to benefit Greece. Even though many more men are likely to have died, the rewards for them would still likely be great. Post-war demobilization, Greece comes to peace, and that, my friends, things are secured. Hungarian Sofia... what the frick? Well, that's not actually expected. I guess in this timeline, considering that the Russian Empire never actually fell into civil war, because with the increased resistance that would be seen in the south. This means that Odessa never fell. There was never anything that saw Russia receive a greater amount of threat because the Austro-Hungarians and Germans were not able to push into the east as far because they had to continuously deal with the south and the Greeks. So now the Soviets are arising out of Hungary, of all things. Not the alternate history that I expected. Yeah, that's the collapse of Austria-Hungary, which is, interesting. What the hell is this shit? Greece is able to gain further territory here against the Ottomans, though they are not able to take the capital initially, as this was negotiated with the Russians, who were not knocked out of the war actually by this logic. And at the same time, we did manage to get Smyrna. The question of how this would affect Allied relations afterwards is tenuous. Greece is greater than she has ever been, and yet there's still more that is desired. With that, after the war, Greece would largely have to focus on its own administration and taking care of things in Smyrna. This would be the only real territory that it was only able to gain, as Constantinople would be granted to the Russians in this new timeline. We would see the unification of Yugoslavia under the Serbs. And yet still, conflicts in the east would not end. Resistant Turkish would have to be dealt with. And just as we saw in our own timeline, eventually the Turks would rise up against the Ottomans itself. And by Turks, since the Ottomans already were Turks, I mean the Turkish movement. The Sultanate would die. The Turkish nationalists didn't actually succeed in taking over the government this time. That is actually odd. Okay, well, we're going to need to continue with the story here anyway, because in the aftermath of World War I, there was another war in which the Greeks would try to then go and take over more territory from Anatolia. I don't know if this thing is actually going to work for this focus.no check here, but we're going to try. Begin the Asia Minor campaign. Yeah. The Greco-Turkish War. The Greeks have landed in Smyrna and are ready to take on a full campaign in Asia Minor in order to push its claim and push Turkey to defeat. The Turks have now shown fierce resistance so far, with irregular units raiding Greek forces in the mountain terrain of Anatolia, and it is unclear how far Greece will go in order to capture Iona and Constantinople. Yes, the Greco-Turkish War. I'm having to change so many things just by virtue of how restricted and limited this game is. So let's go then. No? No, it does not work because the Ottoman Empire won their thing with the Turkish national. God, I can't. I just want to tell a story, and it won't let me. No, they just get Ottoman. Why? We're not even at war. Why did they just get this? Greece requests to occupy territory. Sure, we got it. Low morale on the front. Are you freaking kidding me? Why do you mean low morale on the front? I can't do anything. Lack of terrain knowledge. I'm not even at war. It won't let me do anything. A march on freaking hell. And now we got Benito Mussolini, who's taken power here in Italy in the aftermath here. Okay. Egyptian. This world is significantly more chaos than I anticipated. All right. Well, you know, with that, my friends, I think that there's not really much else that we can really do. What we will say in the aftermath of Greece actually joining the conflict, in the aftermath that the Megali ideas actually succeed, the domino effect of this is going to be catastrophic for many parties. Namely the fact that Austria-Hungary is going to disintegrate into so much worse. Russia actually manages to survive because with increased pressure upon the Austrian southern front, this means that they're not able to devote nearly as many resources over here to Russia, which in turn is able to help them last. Perhaps the civil war never breaks out, or if it does, the White Army is able to actually crush them, and the Russian Empire remains in charge. There is no reason for the Tsar to ever resign, I guess. And part of the negotiations, as I remember here now, is that Russia was supposed to get Constantinople. So while the Megali ideas are 90% secured, they don't get Constantinople because of Russia, which is the big Orthodox leader. And that is actually something that Greece may not actually want to piss off. So yeah, my friends, that is the end of the story that we're telling here. And that, I don't know how to really process that. I guess the German Republic never actually lost its territory over here to Poland because, well, reasons. What should have actually happened from this, since Russia was technically on the winning side, is that Russia should have gotten complete control of Poland and other territories over here for Prussia. But yeah, that's the end of it here. I'm sorry that this one worked out the way that it did. I tried to tell the story as it was. It's just way more difficult. With that, my friends, I think that we're going to end things here today. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and put your own comment in the comment section below about what scenario we should do next. And I will try next time to use something that is not nearly so restrictive in order to do this. If anyone knows any other World War I mods that might be really good to try this for future scenarios, let me know, because this proved to be quite a bit of a pain.